She stood up, walked to the stand, and held up a single sheet of paper. "These are the threats I received after your show," she said calmly. The room froze. "They called me a fascist, threatened me at school, all because I didn't laugh at your joke." What happened next left everyone speechless. But let's start from the beginning. The courtroom buzzed with the low murmur of anticipation, the kind of heavy silence that settles over a room when everyone knows they're about to witness something historic, maybe even explosive. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Journalists from mainstream outlets, young influencers with cameras strapped to their chests, elderly viewers who had followed both names in the case for years. The air conditioning hummed above, but the room was warm, charged with nervous energy. At the plaintiff's table sat Stephen Colbert, entertainer, satirist, and cultural commentator, a man who for decades had comfortably held court before millions on television. He wasn't smiling. Not exactly. It was more of a smirk, the kind that had become his signature, sharpened by years of delivering punchlines with just enough contempt to spark a laugh. He wore a dark, tailored suit and glasses that glinted beneath the courtroom lights. Everything about him said, "I've done this before. I've already won." But this wasn't a studio. This was a court of law. And across from him sat the defendant, Karoline Leavitt, young, poised, and far more controlled than anyone half watching the headlines would have assumed. At 29, Karoline had made waves as a rising conservative commentator, unflinchingly articulate and fiercely principled. To some, she was the voice of a new generation. To others, a convenient target. Her hair was pinned neatly back, her blazer sharp, but it was the look in her eyes that arrested attention. A combination of calm defiance and something deeper. Not anger, not fear. Purpose. When the judge entered, a hush fell over the courtroom like a falling curtain. The bailiff called the room to order. Cameras clicked once, then went still. This wasn't supposed to happen, at least not like this. What had started as a light-hearted interview segment on the Colbert show had spiraled into a cultural wildfire. Colbert had invited Karoline on under the pretense of having a lively political debate. She agreed, knowing full well the risk of walking into a lion's den. What she hadn't expected was the orchestration. From the moment the cameras started rolling during that now infamous episode, Stephen had gone in for the kill, mocking her credentials, laughing over her responses, cutting her off mid-sentence while the audience cackled on cue. At one point, he impersonated her voice in a high-pitched tone, drawing laughter at her expense. But Karoline hadn't flinched. She had stared directly at him, held her line of reasoning, and delivered a closing statement that burned across the internet like wildfire. And that's when everything changed. Clips of the interview went viral. Not the parts Colbert's team clipped and distributed. Those were heavily edited. The full, raw version, the unfiltered conversation, painted a different story. One of a media ambush gone wrong. One of a seasoned host losing control, and of a guest who refused to play the victim. Then came the backlash, but not against Karoline. Against Colbert. Suddenly, late-night comedy's king found himself the punchline. Think pieces, reaction videos, and even former fans called him out for bullying under the guise of satire. Colbert's ratings dipped. Sponsors got nervous. His team, scrambling for narrative control, claimed that Karoline had incited a mob against him, weaponized social media, and deliberately tanked his reputation. Now, here they were, in federal court. The case was unprecedented, a television host suing a former guest for reputational sabotage, and the defendant countersuing for defamation, reputational harm, and targeted suppression across social media platforms. The judge, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, adjusted her glasses as she opened the session. This court recognizes the plaintiff, Stephen Colbert, and the defendant, Karoline Leavitt, she said, voice calm but firm. "We are here to determine the nature of the events that transpired following the broadcast interview dated October 17th of last year and the subsequent actions taken by both parties." Colbert's lead attorney, a polished man in his 50s named Benjamin Kessler, stood up. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that Ms. Leavitt intentionally manipulated the public through selective outrage, inciting a targeted campaign against my client with malicious intent. What began as a harmless piece of satire was twisted into a career-threatening attack, costing Mr. Colbert millions in ad revenue, public trust, and personal dignity." Karoline's attorney, Rachel Monroe, didn't flinch. She simply tapped a stack of documents on the desk and waited her turn. Kessler proceeded to play edited clips of the show, carefully selected to make Colbert look innocuous and Karoline combative. Laughter from the studio audience echoed from the speakers in the courtroom. The jury watched, some with furrowed brows. The footage looked normal, controlled. Colbert appeared charming, sarcastic, perhaps a little smug, but hardly offensive. That is, until Rachel stood. "Your Honor," she said, "we respectfully request that the court view the full, unedited footage of the segment in question, pulled directly from the original server metadata. We believe the complete version tells a different story." The judge nodded. "Proceed." And that's when it began. The screen lit up again. This time, the courtroom watched the segment in real time. No cuts, no edits, no soundtrack. From the start, Colbert's tone was loaded with condescension. He interrupted Karoline 7 times within the first 90 seconds. He rolled his eyes. He pulled faces to provoke laughter. He mimicked her speech. The audience laughed on cue, but in the silence of the courtroom, it all sounded cruel, scripted, mean. Then the messages appeared, subpoenaed from an internal group chat among the show's writing staff. Texts like, "Let's hit her with the baby Reagan line early. Interrupt before she finishes her second point. It'll throw her off. Push the no real experience joke hard. Cut to laughter shots after every punchline, even if it bombs." Silence. The courtroom felt it like a chill. The judge paused the footage. "Ms. Monroe, please confirm the authentication of these messages." "We have affidavits and matching server records, Your Honor," Rachel replied. "These are real." Karoline sat still, her hands folded, her eyes unwavering. For the first time, Stephen Colbert looked less like a performer and more like a man realizing the fourth wall had vanished, and the audience was no longer laughing with him. Stephen Colbert took the stand with the polished ease of someone who had made a career out of controlling the narrative. Dressed immaculately in a charcoal gray suit, he adjusted his cufflinks, glanced at the jury, and offered a faint smile. A performer stepping into familiar light. Only this time, the spotlight wasn't studio lighting, and the audience wasn't paid to clap. The bailiff asked him to raise his right hand. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do," Colbert replied, voice calm, rehearsed. His attorney, Benjamin Kessler, approached. "Mr. Colbert, for the record, can you tell the court who you are and what you do?" Colbert leaned into the mic. "I'm a comedian, a late-night host. I do satire, sometimes harsh but never malicious. My job is to poke at power, challenge ideas, and make people laugh. That's all I've ever done." From the gallery, a few nods, older viewers, perhaps fans, but others remained still, arms crossed, uncertain. "And the episode in question, the one featuring Ms. Leavitt, that was—" "Satire," Colbert repeated firmly. "It was never personal. She came on knowing it was a comedy show. She spoke freely. If the audience laughed, that's not my fault." He smiled again, smug, self-assured. He looked at the judge, then back at Karoline. "I've never silenced anyone. Certainly not Ms. Leavitt." Rachel Monroe, Karoline's attorney, stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to proceed with cross-examination. Go ahead, Ms. Monroe. Rachel approached slowly, papers in hand, and paused in front of the stand. Mr. Colbert, you stated you never intended to humiliate Ms. Leavitt. Is that correct? Yes. You claimed it was all harmless satire. Correct. Then can you explain this message, sent by one of your lead writers 2 hours before the taping? She handed a printout to the judge and the witness. Colbert glanced at the paper. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. Quote, Rachel read aloud. Let's roast the baby Reagan until she cries. America loves when she breaks. That's your staff, correct? He hesitated. Yes, but... Rachel cut in. But you allowed it, approved it, encouraged it. Stephen leaned back. I didn't write that. It's a writer's joke, not a directive. Interesting. Because according to studio transcripts, that exact phrase, baby Reagan, was used verbatim during the taping. Colbert's lips tightened. Rachel wasn't done. You say you didn't silence Ms. Leavitt. Yet her responses were repeatedly interrupted. We counted 17 times in under 6 minutes. Is that normal interview protocol for your show? She was evasive, he replied, and she was answering your questions. I challenged her. That's what I do. Rachel paused, then turned to the jury. That's what he does, unless the guest fires back. Then it becomes a problem. She walked back to her table, picked up another folder, and opened it. Let's talk about what happened after the show aired, she continued. Ms. Leavitt uploaded her own video, full footage, no edits, with a response to your treatment of her. It went viral. Do you deny that? I don't. And are you aware that within 24 hours your production team submitted multiple takedown requests of her video to YouTube, citing it as harassment and misinformation? Colbert shifted in his seat. I wasn't involved in that decision. But it happened under your name, under your legal ownership, and it resulted in her video being flagged, shadow banned, and suppressed on multiple platforms. Silence. Rachel continued. And then you released a follow-up segment mocking her again, this time suggesting her supporters were part of a fringe digital militia. Was that satire too? He said nothing. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Colbert, you may answer. Yes, he muttered. It was satire. Rachel nodded slowly. Then she turned and walked toward the screens set up in the courtroom. With a nod to the technician, she cued a clip. The screen lit up. It was Colbert, standing before his audience, smirking. And if Karoline Leavitt doesn't like being mocked, she's welcome to run home to her little echo chamber where facts go to die. Laughter, applause, studio lighting. Then Rachel pressed pause. And here, she said, cueing a second clip, this time from Karoline's social media, showing death threats she received hours after that segment aired. Emails, comments, messages like, "Go cry to your GOP daddy, fascist buck," or "You're the reason women shouldn't vote." Several jurors flinched. Rachel turned back. Do you still think this is harmless? Colbert stared at the screen. His smirk, the one that had charmed millions, was gone. In its place was something darker. He didn't answer. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Colbert, the court is asking whether you acknowledge that your platform, intentionally or not, led to targeted harassment. He cleared his throat. I never told anyone to harass her. But you lit the match, Rachel said quietly. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. No one moved. Even the bailiff looked visibly unsettled. Then Rachel dropped the final blow. We've obtained a series of internal memos from your network's legal team, specifically emails where executives warned that the segment could be construed as character assassination and advised against re-airing it. Yet it was rebroadcast twice in the following week. She placed the emails on the evidence table. Why proceed if you were warned? Colbert stared at the documents, his jaw clenched. Rachel let the silence stretch. Then she walked back to her seat. No further questions, Your Honor. The judge called for a recess. As the courtroom slowly emptied, whispers began to swirl. Cameras clicked. Some spectators left stunned, others furious. Colbert sat motionless at the plaintiff's table, no longer the star of the room. And across from him, Karoline Leavitt sat calm as ever, untouched by the showmanship, untouched by the noise, just waiting for her turn to speak. What came next would flip the entire case on its head. When court resumed after the brief recess, the air felt heavier, as though something had shifted. Stephen Colbert had returned to his seat, but the smug composure that once defined him now seemed fractured. His suit still fit impeccably, but his movements were slower, measured, even cautious. He no longer looked like a man holding court. He looked like a man surrounded by it. Karoline Leavitt, in contrast, stood up with the grace and conviction of someone who had nothing left to lose, and everything left to prove. She approached the witness stand with her chin slightly raised, shoulders relaxed but firm. The courtroom was silent, as if collectively holding its breath. Her attorney, Rachel Monroe, spoke first. Ms. Leavitt, in your own words, what happened after that interview aired? Karoline inhaled slowly. No dramatic pause, just focus. At first, I thought it was just another hostile media appearance, she began. I've had my ideas challenged before. I've been called names, dismissed, interrupted. It comes with the territory. But this wasn't a debate. It was a setup. Her voice didn't waver. She didn't cry. And that's what made it hit harder. When I walked off that stage, she continued, I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt used. Not because I lost an argument, but because it was never meant to be a conversation. She turned slightly, glancing toward the jury. It was an execution in prime time. The judge leaned forward. You may elaborate, Ms. Leavitt. Karoline's hand reached into a thin folder on the table. From it, she withdrew a single sheet of paper and held it up. This, she said, is a list of the threats I received in the 48 hours after that episode aired. Death threats, rape threats, people describing in detail how they wanted to silence me. She handed the paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Several jurors winced as it was read aloud in silence. My school address was leaked. My family's home was doxxed. My little sister, who's still in high school, was followed on her way home. The courtroom fell into an eerie stillness. Even the journalists had stopped taking notes. Rachel stepped forward again. Did Mr. Colbert or anyone on his team reach out to condemn these threats or defend your right to speak? Karoline's eyes darkened slightly. No. But 2 days later, he made jokes about digital pitchforks and mocked my response video as a tantrum filmed in 4K. He never once acknowledged that I was a human being. She sat still for a moment, letting the silence expand like a weight pressing on everyone's chest. I was 29. I gave a constitutional argument on a comedy show. I didn't call names. I didn't insult anyone. I just didn't laugh at the joke. She looked directly at Colbert, who for the first time was avoiding eye contact. And for that, I was treated like a national threat. Rachel gave her a moment before continuing. Ms. Leavitt, did your team attempt to post your unedited video of the segment? Yes. We uploaded it in full to YouTube, Rumble, and X, but each platform flagged it as either misinformation, copyright infringement, or, in one case, incitement of harassment. We appealed. We provided context. Still taken down. Did you receive any explanation? Only automated notices, until we found internal emails. She gestured to the evidence already submitted. From the plaintiff's media team, labeling my response as dangerous to brand cohesion. One juror whispered something to another. The judge tapped her gavel lightly for silence. Rachel paced slowly. Let's return to the original taping briefly. You've stated this was never intended to be a balanced conversation. What led you to that conclusion? Karoline didn't hesitate. The prep team told me I'd be part of a panel. Then they canceled the other guests last minute. They said the audience would be neutral, but it was studio registered, not random. I was mic'd 5 minutes before going live while Colbert rehearsed punchlines with cue cards. Punchlines? Rachel asked. Karoline nodded. He had jokes written in advance. About my voice, my age, my appearance, none of which related to the topic we agreed to discuss. Federalism and media bias. A low murmur began in the back of the gallery. The judge silenced it with a glance. Rachel approached the jury box now, standing just in front of them. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine walking into what you believe is a policy forum and finding yourself ambushed before a laughing audience. Then imagine defending yourself calmly, only to be buried by digital platforms, mocked by the host, and branded as a threat. She turned back to Karoline. What did you feel in that moment? Karoline's response was soft but chilling. I felt disposable. Rachel returned to her table. No further questions at this time. But the judge spoke up. Ms. Leavitt, I do have one. Why didn't you sue first? Why wait to file a countersuit? Karoline glanced at Colbert again. Because I hoped he'd apologize. Another silence. Deeper. Heavier. Stephen shifted, finally breaking the silence. He adjusted his glasses, stared down at the table, and for a moment looked small. The judge nodded slowly and said, Let's take a short recess before we proceed. As the bailiff called for the break, the gallery erupted into hushed chaos. Reporters scrambling, audience members stunned. But Karoline remained seated, hands folded, eyes focused. The knife was no longer in Colbert's smile. It was in the air between them, silent, visible to all, and sharpened by the truth she had just delivered. And the worst part? She hadn't even begun to fight back yet. The court reconvened after recess, and for the first time there was no casual chatter from the audience, no rustle of papers, just a weighted silence, thick, electric, expectant. The spectacle was over. Now came the reckoning. Judge Hartley adjusted her robe and looked over the rim of her glasses. The defense may proceed with their next witness. Rachel Monroe stood and called, Dr. Isaac Brenner, please take the stand. A tall, composed man in his late 40s with wire-frame glasses and a laptop tucked under his arm walked forward. He looked more like a college professor than someone involved in a high-stakes media trial, but that's precisely what he was, a forensic media analyst and digital footprint specialist. Dr. Brenner, Rachel began, can you tell the court your area of expertise? I specialize in tracking algorithmic behavior, social media flagging mechanisms, and suppression patterns across digital content ecosystems, particularly YouTube, X, and Meta platforms, he said calmly. And were you asked to perform an analysis of what happened to Ms. Leavitt's content following her appearance on The Colbert Show? I was, he confirmed, opening his laptop. With the judge's permission, he connected the machine to the courtroom's display monitors. What you're looking at here, he said, bringing up a series of graphs, is the performance curve of Ms. Leavitt's full-length response video, the one where she uploads the unedited interview and her own commentary. He highlighted a line that surged upward in the first few hours, then flatlined abruptly. Approximately 3 hours after posting, the video's organic growth was strangled. Engagement dropped by 97%. It was then manually restricted and deranked by both YouTube's and Meta's systems. Was this standard behavior for content of this type? Rachel asked. No, he replied bluntly. In fact, my team examined over 150 similar videos by other commentators in the same time frame. None experienced this pattern, not unless they had been manually flagged. Colbert shifted in his seat. Rachel leaned in. "Who flagged it, Doctor?" Dr. Brenner brought up an internal audit log, metadata matched to an enterprise content management suite. These flags were traced to an IP range belonging to Global Satirical Media LLC, the corporate umbrella under which The Colbert Show operates. A gasp rippled through the audience. The judge tapped her gavel. Silence. Rachel nodded. "So, Mr. Colbert's team directly interfered with Ms. Leavitt's ability to defend herself?" "Correct. They flagged her response for misinformation, targeted harassment, and, most ironically, manipulative editing, even though her version was uncut." The judge turned to Colbert's side. "Mr. Kessler, would your team like to respond?" Kessler stood, face pale. "Your Honor, we do not dispute that content was flagged, but it was done for quality control and brand protection, not suppression." "Define brand protection," the judge said sharply. Kessler hesitated. "We were concerned that her version misrepresented the tone of the segment." Rachel cut in, voice suddenly sharper. "Even though the video was the raw, unedited feed?" Kessler didn't answer. Rachel approached the jury. "Let me be clear. The plaintiff's team used their platform to stage an ambush. Then, when the truth risked surfacing, when Ms. Leavitt dared to push back, they coordinated a digital smear campaign to silence her. They flagged the truth as dangerous." She turned to Dr. Brenner. "Did these actions affect Ms. Leavitt's professional career?" Dr. Brenner nodded. "Within a week, several speaking engagements were canceled. Her monetization was revoked on multiple platforms. She lost sponsorships and was placed under algorithmic review by at least 2 networks." Colbert's legal team remained stone silent. Rachel finished with one final image, a side-by-side comparison of Colbert's YouTube segment titled "Roasting Baby Reagan," which trended for 6 days, and Karoline's suppressed video marked "Removed for violation of terms." "This," she said, pointing to the screen, "isn't just media bias. It's targeted defamation. And it was intentional." The judge stared at the image for several long seconds. Then she turned to Colbert. "Mr. Colbert, do you have anything to say?" He slowly stood. "Your Honor, I didn't direct my team to do this. I wasn't aware of how far they were going." Karoline, seated beside Rachel, raised her eyebrows slightly but said nothing. Her silence spoke volumes. The judge didn't flinch. "You benefited from their actions. You capitalized on the fallout." Colbert sat back down, visibly shaken now. The public persona was slipping. The spotlight, his longtime ally, was now a blistering interrogation lamp. The judge turned to Rachel. "Continue." Rachel returned to her table and retrieved a small, leather-bound notebook. "Your Honor, we would now like to enter into Evidence Exhibit 17, a field report from a digital risk consultancy firm warning Ms. Leavitt of coordinated bot activity traced to the same entity, Global Satirical Media, aimed at mass reporting her content across platforms." Colbert's attorney objected. "Speculation." But the judge overruled him immediately. "It's data-backed. Sit down, Mr. Kessler." Rachel opened the report. Over 10,000 identical comments were posted under her videos in under 2 hours. Phrases like, "Fascist Barbie," "Go cry to Congress," and "She asked for it," repeated in perfect unison. "Botnets," the judge muttered. "Weaponized disinformation." Rachel walked to the center of the courtroom, her voice quieted. "What we've seen here isn't just a celebrity punching down. It's an empire defending its narrative, not with facts, not with reason, but with suppression, manipulation, and cruelty masked as comedy." She looked toward Colbert, then back at the jury. The question isn't whether Ms. Leavitt fought back too hard. The question is, how much silence was expected of her in the first place? And for the first time since the trial began, the jury was fully, visibly on her side. It started with silence, a silence so dense it seemed to absorb every breath in the courtroom. Karoline Leavitt stood slowly, gripping a single sheet of paper in her right hand. No briefcase, no folder, just one document, folded in half, slightly worn at the corners. She didn't look at the judge, or the attorneys, or even the cameras. She looked directly at the jury, as if, for the first time in this entire ordeal, she was finally ready to show them not just evidence, but pain. "Your Honor," Rachel said, standing beside her, "with the court's permission, Ms. Leavitt would like to present one final exhibit, a personal one." The judge glanced up from her notes and nodded. "Proceed." Karoline stepped forward, her heels echoing softly on the polished floor. She unfolded the paper with trembling fingers, not from fear, but from the weight of what it carried. A death list, in her own words. "This is a list of every threat I received in the 72 hours after the Colbert show aired my segment," she said, voice even. "I stopped counting after 48. She cleared her throat. "Let me read a few." Her voice didn't shake. If anything, it grew colder, more focused. "You're the reason women shouldn't vote. Go kill yourself. If you show up at Redacted University again, you won't leave breathing. We know where you live, fascist bitch. Hope someone brings gasoline to your next rally." Gasps broke through the courtroom, involuntary, sharp. A woman in the second row of the gallery covered her mouth. A man in the jury box stared wide-eyed, lips parted in disbelief. Even a reporter dropped his pen. Karoline looked up, eyes glassy but dry. "I was mocked on national television and then hunted online like prey," she said, "for daring to speak, not scream, not shout, just speak. I was 29 years old, and my crime was answering questions with facts." She held the paper up toward the jury. None of these people saw the unedited footage. They saw Stephen's version, the one that made me out to be dangerous, ridiculous, even subhuman. That's the only version that platforms allowed to trend. Then she turned. For every one of those comments, I received 20 others that were deleted automatically, messages I never even saw. My team showed me screenshots. Some of them talked about my younger sister. One of them knew what car she drove. The room darkened with collective dread, like a funeral without music. Colbert's face had gone pale. He leaned forward in his seat, elbows on the table, knuckles pressed to his lips. His attorney whispered something, but he didn't react. For once, the smirk was gone. And it wasn't coming back. Karoline walked toward the center of the room. I did not retaliate. I didn't post edited clips. I didn't sue first. I didn't scream for censorship. I didn't send bot armies. I uploaded one video, the truth. And for that, I was silenced. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I don't care about fame. I don't want to own anyone. I just want to know when we decided that certain people, certain voices, don't deserve context or protection or even basic dignity." Rachel stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Karoline's shoulder. "You've made your point, Karoline." But Karoline didn't step down. Instead, she looked directly at Stephen Colbert. "Do you remember what you said in the follow-up segment?" she asked him. Colbert didn't respond. "You said, 'The revolution will not be grammatically correct.' And then you laughed. You laughed as I got death threats. You laughed as I was pulled off speaking panels. You laughed while your staff doubled down and the world turned on me for daring to exist outside your script." She took a step closer. "You don't know me. You never cared to. You called me a baby Reagan? Fine. But I'm not a baby, and I'm not running." Silence again. Then the most unexpected sound in any courtroom. Clapping. It started with a single person in the gallery, an elderly woman seated with perfect posture. Then it spread. A low, reluctant ripple of applause, growing by the second, until it became a small storm of human reaction. The bailiff shouted for order. The judge banged her gavel. "Order in the court!" The applause died quickly, but its presence lingered like heat after lightning. The judge exhaled slowly. "Ms. Leavitt, thank you. You may be seated." Karoline nodded and walked back to her seat. Her hands still trembled, but her expression didn't break. Across the aisle, Stephen Colbert leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something. Then, in a move that stunned the courtroom, he stood up, unprompted, and asked the judge, "May I respond?" The judge paused, surprised. "You're not on the stand, Mr. Colbert." He looked straight at her. "Then may I request to be put back on it?" Rachel objected. "Your Honor, the witness was already cross-examined. We are closing defense testimony." But the judge raised a hand. "I'll allow it, for rebuttal only." Colbert walked slowly to the stand. He didn't look theatrical anymore. He looked shaken, small, like a man finally seeing the aftermath of a joke that went too far. "I didn't realize," he said, voice low. "I didn't think." He stopped. "I never wanted this. I thought I was challenging power. I thought she was power." He looked at Karoline now. "But maybe I was wrong." Gasps again. But this time, not at a bombshell. At a crack in the armor. Colbert swallowed hard. "If you were hurt, I'm sorry. That wasn't the point. And if my team crossed a line, then that's on me." He turned to the judge. "I don't know what happens next, but I know I can't make people laugh if I don't know when to stop." For a split second, it felt like an apology. Almost. But Rachel rose immediately. "Your Honor, we accept Mr. Colbert's statement, but we ask the court to consider not just what was said today, but what was done over months of damage, suppression, and indifference. Ms. Leavitt didn't ask to be a symbol. She was made into one. Against her will." The judge nodded solemnly. "We'll proceed to closing statements tomorrow." And with that, the courtroom began to empty, slowly, heavily, reverently. No noise, no verdict yet. But something had broken in that room, and everyone felt it. The next morning, the atmosphere in the courtroom was different, tighter. As though everyone, judge, jury, audience, sensed the final act was approaching, and no one quite knew who would be left standing when the curtain fell. Stephen Colbert sat still at the plaintiff's table, eyes slightly red-rimmed, suit pressed but lacking its usual gleam. The showman was unraveling, thread by thread. He avoided Karoline's gaze now, not out of defiance, but perhaps shame. Judge Hartley entered, her expression unreadable. "We'll begin with the defense's final piece of evidence," she announced. Rachel Monroe stood, her tone steady but sharp. "Your Honor, the defense calls no new witnesses. Instead, we request permission to present one final exhibit, a composite timeline of post-broadcast activity involving the plaintiff's production team." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The lights dimmed slightly as the projection screen came to life. On it appeared a timeline. Not just dates, but hours and minutes, broken into color-coded bars. "This," Rachel explained, "is a digital reconstruction of the hours and days following the airing of Ms. Leavitt's interview. It was assembled using server logs, internal communications, platform API data, and metadata from flagged content." She clicked a remote. The first entry appeared, October 17th, 10:34 p.m. Episode airs. By 10:40 p.m., Rachel continued, a Slack message is sent within the Colbert Show's production channel reading, "She didn't crack. Run damage control. Clip it right. She tapped again. October 18th, 8:03 a.m. Edited version of the interview uploaded to YouTube. Significantly altered, Rachel noted. Interruptions cut. Laughter boosted. Karoline's most coherent points muted under crowd reactions. Another click. October 18th, 12:17 p.m. Internal directive sent. Suppress her upload. Request removal under misinformation TOS. Rachel turned to the jury. This is where it crosses the line. This wasn't satire anymore. It was control. Intentional, coordinated control. Then came the clip that silenced even the court reporters typing. A full segment from the next night's Colbert show. Unedited. Stephen stands at his desk, addressing the camera. And in case you missed it, our guest last night didn't seem to understand how comedy works. Apparently, she thought she was walking into C-SPAN Live, not late night. Poor thing. Maybe next time she'll bring flashcards and a sense of humor. The crowd laughs. He continues. But don't worry. I think she's doing just fine. She posted a rebuttal video. 3 cameras, soft lighting, and more makeup than a Bravo reunion. The revolution will not be grammatically correct, folks. Laughter again. Applause. Then, the line that made the courtroom collectively stop breathing. And if you want to see the real meltdown, check the comments. It's like a MAGA bonfire under that video. Be careful, though. Bring popcorn and maybe a hazmat suit. The video ended. Rachel didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The judge finally broke the silence. Is that footage authentic? Yes, Your Honor, Rachel said. Unaired segment, pulled from the network archive under discovery request. They never released this version publicly. Colbert sat frozen, one hand clenched on the table. Even his attorney seemed unsure whether to speak or bury his face in his notes. Rachel stepped forward. Not only did Mr. Colbert publicly mock Ms. Leavitt again, knowing she was receiving threats, but he directed his audience to pile on. He invited it, he encouraged it, and internally, his staff coordinated to suppress her defense in real time. She paused. This is not comedy. This is character assassination. The jury looked stunned, some visibly shaken. One woman wiped her eye with a tissue. Rachel turned to Judge Hartley. We rest our case. The judge nodded. Mr. Kessler, any rebuttal? Colbert's attorney stood, hesitated, then slowly sat back down. The plaintiff withdraws rebuttal testimony. Gasps rippled through the room. Stephen Colbert whispered something to his lawyer. No one heard what. But the weight of it was clear. They were done talking. The judge turned to the jury. We'll move to closing argument shortly, but before we do, I want to make something very clear. She removed her glasses. This case is not about politics. It is not about left or right. It is about power, and whether a powerful man with a microphone gets to control the story forever, or whether the people he targets are allowed to speak back. She looked straight at Colbert. You had the platform. You had the audience. You had the edit room. What Ms. Leavitt had was the truth, and she fought for the right to show it. Then she leaned back. Court is in recess until closing arguments. As people rose from their seats, something had changed, not just in the air, but in perception. Colbert was no longer the one shaping the narrative. The curtain had fallen, and behind it wasn't the brilliant satirist the nation had trusted for years. Behind it was a man who didn't know when the joke had stopped being funny, and no one, not even him, was laughing anymore. The courtroom was so quiet, it felt like even the walls were holding their breath. 12 men and women sat in the jury box, their expressions carved in stone. They had deliberated for just under 2 hours, long enough to be thorough, but short enough to suggest clarity. The bailiff had already announced that a verdict had been reached, and now every soul in that room was waiting for one moment, one sentence, one final judgment. Stephen Colbert sat with his hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white. His usual calm was gone. The carefully managed confidence of a public figure had dissolved into a haunted stillness. His attorney, Benjamin Kessler, stared ahead blankly, as if already bracing for what was coming. Karoline Leavitt sat tall, hands resting gently in her lap. She didn't look triumphant, not smug, just ready. The storm was nearly over, and win or lose, she had stood through every gust. The judge entered. "All rise." Everyone stood. Judge Hartley took her seat, gave a brief nod, and looked to the foreperson of the jury. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" A man in his early 60s stood, his voice calm but firm. "We have, Your Honor." Rachel Monroe gave a quiet exhale but kept her gaze fixed forward. The clerk approached, took the sealed envelope, and passed it to the judge. She opened it, her eyes scanning the page. For a moment, her face gave away nothing. Then she turned to the room. "In the matter of Colbert v. Leavitt, on the count of reputational defamation and damages brought by the plaintiff," the room held its breath, "the jury finds in favor of the defendant, Ms. Karoline Leavitt." There was a beat, then a crackle of movement, but the judge raised her hand quickly. "On the counterclaim of defamation, targeted suppression, and reputational harm brought by Ms. Leavitt." Another pause. Colbert stared forward, unmoving. "The jury finds in favor of the plaintiff. Damages awarded, $18 million. It was done, and the room, held in silence for so long, erupted. It wasn't cheering, not wild applause, but a wave of sound. Exhaled breaths, gasps, even quiet weeping, rippled across the gallery. People stood stunned. Reporters immediately began scribbling, texting, whispering into their phones. The bailiff called for order again, but the room would never be the same. Stephen Colbert looked stunned, as if he hadn't fully understood even now that the world had shifted. His lips parted slightly, his brows furrowed in disbelief. He wasn't used to losing. Certainly not like this. Certainly not publicly, before cameras and transcripts and viral headlines waiting to be born. Kessler leaned in to whisper something, likely about appeal processes, legal options. But Colbert didn't answer. His eyes were glassy, and for the first time in perhaps his entire career, he was speechless. Karoline didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply closed her eyes for a long second, like someone finally letting go of breath after holding it underwater for too long. When she opened them again, the entire courtroom was watching her. The judge tapped the gavel lightly once. "This court thanks the jury for their service. You are now dismissed." She turned to the room. "Let the record show. The court finds that satire does not grant immunity to malicious action, that public platforms cannot become weapons against those who dare to respond, and that every citizen, no matter their age, politics, or media status, deserves the full protection of the truth." Then she rose and exited through the side door. Chaos began immediately. Cameras were raised. Journalists sprinted toward the hallway. Legal analysts shouted headlines into live microphones. A storm of digital coverage erupted outside the courthouse like a volcano. Clips, tweets, news segments forming within minutes. But inside, for one moment longer, Karoline Leavitt stood still in the eye of it all. She turned to Rachel and whispered, "We did it." Rachel smiled. "You did it. I just held the line." Then Karoline walked out, not with security flanking her sides, not with an entourage, just a young woman in a navy blazer walking into a world that had finally listened. Outside, a sea of cameras awaited. "Karoline, do you feel vindicated? Do you forgive Colbert? What will you do with the settlement?" She raised a hand gently, and the crowd quieted. "I didn't do this for revenge," she said. I did this because I was told I didn't belong in the conversation, that my voice was a threat, that my words deserved to be erased. Today the court said otherwise. A few more flashes. She continued. I don't care if people agree with me politically. I don't even care if they like me. But they should care when the powerful decide who gets to speak. Because if they can silence me, they can silence anyone. And then she stepped away. The internet exploded. Within an hour, hatched Leavitt verdict was trending in 47 states. News anchors struggled to frame the story. Was it a free speech victory? A feminist win? A cultural shift? A takedown of legacy media? The truth was simpler. A powerful man had tried to turn a woman into a punchline, but she turned it into a courtroom victory. And that victory, quiet, unwavering, and devastatingly earned, would echo far beyond that single courtroom. Because sometimes, the best comeback isn't a joke, it's justice. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy had reached a crescendo. Cameras lined the sidewalks, spilling onto the street. News vans blocked traffic for 2 city blocks. Microphones, boom poles, and smartphones pointed in every direction like a forest of antennae trying to catch a single signal, her voice. Karoline Leavitt stood behind a plain wooden podium hastily rolled out by the courthouse staff. No branding, no slogan, just her. Behind her, Rachel Monroe stood calmly, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold like a seasoned general. And somewhere in the background, 6 network producers barked into earpieces, trying to prepare exclusive segments they were now desperate to frame not as hit pieces, but as profiles in courage. The same people who'd once questioned her legitimacy were now lining up for interviews. But Karoline didn't bask in the spotlight. She didn't lean in or wave or even smile. Instead, she spoke. I know some of you are wondering what I'll say, she began. Some of you are hoping I'll take a victory lap. Some are hoping I'll attack. She looked out at the mass of lenses and faces. I'm not going to do either. The street fell still. I'm not here today to gloat. I'm here because I had to fight for the basic right to respond, to tell my side of the story when someone tried to write it for me. She paused. That shouldn't require a court of law. There was no applause, no chants, just silence. The good kind, the respectful kind. I walked into a TV studio last year expecting debate, she continued. Instead, I was humiliated, edited, mocked, and erased. Then, when I posted the truth, I was silenced again. Not just by the show, but by the very platforms that claim to be neutral. She held up her phone. This thing, right here, became my courtroom before I ever stepped into one. And guess what? It worked. Millions of people saw what really happened, and they made up their own minds. Her voice softened. This wasn't just about Stephen Colbert. It never was. This was about power, and who gets to decide what the truth sounds like. It's about who gets to interrupt, and who gets muted. A young woman in the front row, maybe a college student, wiped her eye. Karoline continued. I forgive Mr. Colbert, truly, but I also hope he reflects on what it means to punch up versus punch down. Because when you have millions of followers, a national platform, and a team of writers scripting your insults, that's not comedy anymore. She stepped back, a final sentence. Every voice matters, even the ones they tell you to laugh at. Then she walked away. No entourage, no security detail, just Karoline and Rachel, pushing their way through a sea of reporters who now followed like shadows. Over the next 48 hours, the case became the biggest media story in the country. Late-night comedians fell into awkward silence. Some issued short statements, others tried to spin it with jokes. But the audience wasn't laughing like before. It was as if the laughter had been exposed for what it was, a shield for cruelty wrapped in applause. Mainstream media outlets scrambled, panels erupted across CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, even BBC. Everyone had a take. But none of them could deny one thing. Karoline Leavitt had emerged not just intact, but undeniable. She appeared on 60 Minutes, on Morning Wire, on podcasts across the ideological spectrum. Each time she said the same thing. This wasn't about silencing anyone. This was about ending the idea that I should be silent just because someone with a bigger audience doesn't like what I believe. What struck people most was her restraint. She wasn't angry. She wasn't performative. She was measured, disciplined, human. And slowly the narrative changed. Not because of spin, but because people saw what had really happened. Clips of the trial were remixed into inspirational montages, viewed tens of millions of times. College students printed her quotes on flyers. A congresswoman cited the verdict during a hearing on tech platform bias. The ripple spread. Meanwhile, Stephen Colbert returned to his show after a week-long hiatus. He addressed the issue briefly. I tried to be funny and I failed. That's on me. The applause was polite, but the electricity was gone. Something had shifted, and not just in him, but in the culture around him. The age of unchallenged media monologues was over. Now, people wanted dialogue. 2 weeks after the verdict, Karoline stood backstage at a town hall event in Ohio. It wasn't glamorous. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, the kind of place where real conversations happen. A volunteer approached her. Miss Leavitt, someone's here who drove 6 hours just to meet you. She smiled. Send them in. A teenage girl entered, holding a small notebook and shaking slightly. Karoline greeted her gently. Hey there. The girl's voice trembled. I just wanted to say thank you. I watched what happened to you, and it made me feel like I could speak up too, even if people laugh. Karoline knelt to her level. They only laugh when they're scared of what you might say, she whispered. Speak anyway. The girl hugged her, and in that moment, far from cameras, far from microphones, far from any court, the real verdict was sealed, not by law, but by truth.